Millionaire CEO thought he had lost everything until he met his son at his wife's grave. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Rain fell softly on the vast green fields of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, a place where silence carried the weight of countless untold stories. David Whitman, a man approaching 60, stepped out of his elegant black sedan, his polished shoes crunching against the wet gravel as he walked toward a familiar headstone. He had been coming here every year on this exact date, October 12th, to honor the memory of the only woman he had truly loved. His hands, still firm but aged by time, carried a bouquet of white lilies, Elena's favorite. Every visit to this grave was a reminder of what he had lost, of the decisions that shaped his life into the solitary existence it had become. David was a man of power and wealth, a real estate magnate who had built an empire from nothing. His name was known throughout New York City, appearing in business magazine headlines and on towering billboards advertising his latest luxury apartment projects. He had everything a man could desire: influence, financial security, and a lifestyle envied by many. Yet in these moments of silence at the cemetery, none of that mattered. Here, he wasn't the ruthless businessman or the calculating investor, but simply a grieving man who once had a love so pure that even time hadn't managed to erase it. Elena had been the only softness in his hardened world. He had searched for her for years after she disappeared without a trace, using every connection and resource at his disposal. But Elena had vanished like a whisper in the wind. Then, 5 years ago, he found her here in this cemetery, not in life, but in death. He had arrived too late, only to discover she had passed away from an illness, leaving no explanation, no closure, just a name etched on a headstone. "It's been 5 years, Elena," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling of leaves. "And I still don't have the answers." A sudden movement in the distance caught his attention. He wasn't alone. A young man, probably in his 20s, stood a few meters away, hands thrust deep into the pockets of his worn leather jacket. He had dark hair, curling slightly at the edges, and a lean frame that suggested hardship rather than privilege. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of sadness and hesitation as he looked at the same grave David had been kneeling before. David frowned. He had never seen anyone else visit Elena's grave. He had assumed she had no other family, no one who still remembered her. But this young man wasn't just passing by. There was something in the way he looked at the grave, something deeply personal. David rose slowly, his penetrating eyes studying the stranger. "You knew her?" he asked, his voice firm but full of curiosity. The young man hesitated, shifting slightly as if deciding whether to answer. Then, after a long pause, he spoke, his voice rough but filled with a strange familiarity. "She was my mother." David's heart stopped for a moment. The world around him blurred, the rain, the trees, the headstones, all disappearing into a haze. He stared at the boy, searching for signs, for proof that this wasn't some cruel trick of the universe. "What did you say?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The young man exhaled sharply, running a hand through his damp hair. "Elena Whitman was my mother," he repeated, his gaze fixing on David. "And if what she told me is true, then you're my father." David felt the ground move beneath him as if the earth itself had split open. The words fell on him like a massive wave, sweeping away all the assumptions he had ever held. He had a son he never knew existed, a son Elena had hidden from him all these years. His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind racing through 1,000 questions. But only one managed to escape his lips. "Why didn't she tell me?" The young man gave a bitter smile that contained years of unanswered pain. "I guess that's something you'll have to figure out," he said. Then without another word he turned and walked away, disappearing into the misty rain, leaving David alone in front of Elena's grave, more lost than he had ever been in his entire life. David remained frozen in place as the sound of rain faded into a distant murmur. The words the young man had spoken still echoed in his mind, each syllable cutting through him like a blade. She was my mother. You are my father. He tried to grasp the reality of it, but it felt unreal, like a dream slipping through his fingers. His son, his own flesh and blood, had stood right in front of him and then walked away. His legs were weak as he reached out, steadying himself with a trembling hand on Elena's headstone. Why had she hidden this from him? Why had she let him live all these years believing she had disappeared without reason? His breath came in shallow gasps as he turned to scan the cemetery for any sign of the young man, but he was lost among the shadows of trees and the gray mist settling over Brooklyn. For the first time in years, David felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel: panic. He had spent his life controlling everything around him, ensuring nothing caught him off guard. Yet here he stood in the rain, powerless. He had to find him. He couldn't just let him disappear. He needed answers. With hurried steps, he ran toward the cemetery entrance, his eyes darting back and forth for any sign of the young man. When he reached the main road, his heart pounded as he spotted a solitary figure walking away, shoulders hunched against the cold. Without thinking, David called out, his voice breaking the evening silence. "Wait!" The young man stopped but didn't turn around. David took a deep breath, his pulse racing as he closed the distance between them. When he reached him, he hesitated, not knowing what to say. "Please, don't walk away. I just need to understand." The young man turned slowly, his dark eyes unreadable. Up close, David could see the faint resemblance, something in the shape of his jaw, the sharpness of his gaze. It unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. The boy, however, seemed unimpressed. "Understand what?" His voice carried a quiet resentment. "That you never knew I existed? That my mother raised me alone while you built your empire?" David flinched. He had always prided himself on being a man who faced truth head-on. But this was a truth he wasn't prepared for. "I swear to you, I had no idea," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "She never told me." He searched the young man's face for some sign that he believed him, but found only cautious skepticism. "What's your name?" David asked, realizing he didn't even know the most basic thing about his own son. A pause. Then reluctantly the young man answered, "Nathan." Nathan. The name felt strange, yet oddly familiar, as if it had been waiting in some hidden part of his soul all these years. David swallowed the lump in his throat. "Nathan, I don't know why Elena didn't tell me. I don't know why she hid you from me, but I need to know. Please tell me about her." Nathan let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "You want me to tell you about her?" he asked bitterly. "Where were you when she was sick? When she was struggling to pay rent? When she worked double shifts just to keep us afloat? Do you have any idea how many nights she cried herself to sleep wondering if she'd made the right decision?" David felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. He had spent years grieving for Elena, believing she had chosen to leave him, never imagining she had been suffering. The thought of her struggling while he lived in penthouses and signed multi-million-dollar deals made him sick to his stomach. "I didn't know," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "If I had, I would have—" Nathan cut him off. "You would have what? Swooped in like a hero and fixed everything with your money?" His eyes burned with anger. "That's the difference between us. You think money solves everything, but she didn't need your money. She needed you and you weren't there." David felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. He had no defense, no justification, just the harsh reality that he had failed Elena without even knowing it. David sat in his penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue, staring at the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. New York had always been his kingdom, a place where he thrived, where every business deal, every skyscraper, every financial triumph was another trophy in his collection. But tonight, the city seemed cold and unfamiliar. His reflection in the glass looked like that of a stranger, a man who had everything yet nothing. Nathan's words echoed in his mind, each cutting deeper than the last. She didn't need your money. She needed you. He had spent years believing Elena had abandoned him, when in reality she had been raising his son alone, suffering in ways he couldn't imagine. The thought of her working double shifts, struggling to pay rent while he built his empire, made his stomach turn. How had he not known? How had he never felt in his soul that a part of him was out there, growing up without him? His mind raced back to the cemetery, to the moment he first saw Nathan. He didn't need a DNA test to confirm it. He had seen it in the boy's eyes, in the sharp angles of his face. He was David's son. There was no doubt. And yet Nathan had walked away, leaving David with more questions than answers. He couldn't let it end like this. He had spent his life controlling outcomes, ensuring things happened his way. He had to find Nathan again. He had to understand. Picking up his phone, he dialed the number of the only person he knew could help. Robert Vega, a private investigator he had used in the past. Within minutes, Robert answered with his calm, professional voice. "Mr. Whitman, what can I do for you?" David hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "I need you to find someone, a young man named Nathan. I don't have a last name. I only know his mother was Elena Whitman." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Robert spoke again. "I'll see what I can do." The next day, David buried himself in work, trying to distract himself from the storm inside his head. Meetings, contracts, financial reports. None of it held the same meaning it had before. For the first time in years, the weight of his success felt hollow. He had spent his life building wealth, but for what? What was the point if the one thing that truly mattered had slipped through his fingers? By evening, his phone buzzed. It was Robert. "I found him," the investigator said simply. "Nathan Whitman, 23 years old, lives in Queens in a small apartment near Astoria Park. Works at a garage on Steinway Street." David exhaled, gripping the edge of his desk. "Send me the address." Later that night, he found himself parked outside a run-down apartment building in Queens. It was a far cry from the luxury of Manhattan, the kind of place he had never imagined his son growing up in. The stairs were rusty, and paint peeled from the walls. He hesitated before getting out of the car, his heart pounding in his ears. He had closed billion-dollar deals and faced ruthless competitors, but standing in front of this door, about to confront his own son, left him more nervous than ever before. He knocked twice. The door opened slightly, revealing Nathan's cautious face. The moment he saw David, his expression hardened. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded. David took a deep breath. "I just want to talk." Nathan scoffed, shaking his head. "You don't give up, do you?" "No," David admitted. "Not when something matters." For a long moment, Nathan didn't move. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he stepped aside, allowing David inside. The apartment was small, cluttered with worn furniture and walls covered in sketches and blueprints. David's eyes flicked to them, recognizing the detailed mechanical designs. "You're an engineer?" he asked. Nathan shrugged. "Trying to study part-time, at City College, working at the garage to pay for it." David felt another pang of guilt. His son was working to put himself through school while David had more money than he could spend. He cleared his throat. "I didn't come here to judge your life, I need to understand. Why didn't she tell me?" Nathan crossed his arms, leaning against the counter. "Because she didn't want to be your charity case. She knew you had your empire, your priorities. She didn't want to drag you into something you didn't choose." David's chest tightened. "But I would have chosen," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I would have been there." David had always been a man of action. Throughout his life, he had made decisions with the kind of certainty that came from years of experience. He was used to being in control, knowing what would come next. But in this new chapter of his life with Nathan, he felt like he was navigating uncharted waters. It had been weeks since their dinner at the restaurant, and though they hadn't spoken much since then, David couldn't shake the feeling that things were slowly beginning to change. Nathan hadn't called, but he hadn't shut David out either. The silence between them was less uncomfortable now, like a silent truce that both were honoring. It was a fragile peace, but still it was peace. David did everything he could to maintain the connection without overwhelming Nathan. He sent a few text messages checking in now and then, never pushing too hard. And occasionally Nathan responded. The messages were brief but civil. No talk about the past, just updates about school and work. Nothing that suggested any deeper connection. Still, David clung to these small signs. He knew it was going to take time. He had to prove to Nathan that he wasn't just another rich man, trying to buy his way into his life. Nathan had made it clear in their first conversation that he wasn't interested in charity, and David respected that. He wasn't looking to buy Nathan's affection. He only wanted a chance to earn it. It was a Saturday afternoon when Nathan finally reached out. David's phone vibrated, and when he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was Nathan, with a simple message. "Are you free for coffee?" David didn't hesitate. He responded in seconds. Absolutely. When and where? They agreed to meet at a cafe in Brooklyn, a place that Nathan said was one of his favorites. It was a small independent spot on Court Street, nestled between old brick buildings, the kind of place where the barista knew each customer's name. David arrived early, his nerves on edge with anticipation. This was an opportunity, perhaps, the first real one, to build something with his son. When Nathan walked in, David immediately noticed how much he resembled Elena. It wasn't just in his features. It was in the tilt of his head, the way his eyes lit up when he was focused. For a moment, it took everything in David not to let the flood of emotions overwhelm him. But he quickly pushed those feelings aside. Nathan was here, and that was all. That mattered. They exchanged greetings, and Nathan led David to a corner table near the window. It was a quiet spot with a view of the busy street outside, the hustle and bustle of midday Brooklyn life moving in the background. Nathan ordered a black coffee, just like his mother used to drink, and David did the same. They sat, and, for the first time in weeks, David felt the weight of the silence between them lighten a bit. Then Nathan started to break the quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said that night." David nodded, not sure where this conversation was going. "Which part?" "You know, about wanting to get to know me, wanting to be involved," Nathan said, taking a sip of his coffee. "I was kind of a jerk about it, wasn't I?" David almost couldn't believe what he was hearing. Nathan was apologizing. He hadn't expected that. "No, you weren't a jerk," David said, his voice calm. "You were honest, and I respect that." Nathan looked at his cup, his fingers tapping nervously on the ceramic. "I guess I just don't know what to do with all of this. I spent my whole life thinking I was alone in this, and now you're telling me you were there all along, living a completely different life." David felt the weight of those words sink in. He had never fully understood the impact his absence had on Nathan, but hearing it now, seeing the pain in his eyes, made him feel the enormity of what he had missed. "I can't change what happened, Nathan. But I can be here now, if you'll let me." Nathan didn't respond immediately. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze turning to the street outside. "I don't know if I can forget everything," he said quietly. "I built my life without you, learned to rely on myself, and it's not easy to just let someone in." David understood. He had built his own life around achievements and acquisitions, but none of that mattered now. None of that could replace the relationship he never had with his son. "I'm not asking you to forget, I'm asking for a chance to be part of your life. No commitments, no expectations, just us figuring this out together." Nathan met his gaze, and then his expression softened for the first time. "I'm still upset about a lot of things about how all of this happened, but I'm also curious, and I guess that's something, right?" David smiled, feeling a sense of relief that he hadn't realized he was carrying. "That's more than enough for me." For the next hour, they talked. Slowly, the walls began to fall. They discussed everything from Nathan's dreams for the future to the strangeness of their first meeting. David made sure to listen more than he talked. He knew that this wasn't just about him, it was about Nathan and the time they had lost. "You know," Nathan said, "maybe we could do this again. Just coffee. I don't know about being a family or anything." He paused, then added, "But maybe we Could try, one step at a time, right? David's heart soared, and for the first time he allowed himself to have hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a beginning. The days that followed brought a subtle shift in their relationship. David found himself checking his phone more frequently than normal, hoping for a message that might never come. Since their meeting at the cafe, he felt a change in the air, a shift in the way Nathan viewed him. It wasn't a door wide open yet, but at least it wasn't locked anymore. A few days passed, and though Nathan hadn't reached out again, David didn't want to push too hard. He knew this would require patience, something he had in abundance in business but had never needed so much in his personal life. Then, late one night, as he sat in his penthouse overlooking the skyline of New York, his phone rang. He grabbed it quickly, his heart jumping a little when he saw Nathan's name. "Hey, Nathan, everything okay?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, and then Nathan exhaled as if he had been debating whether to proceed with the call. "Hey," he said finally. "So I guess I just wanted to ask you something." "Go ahead," David said, keeping his tone neutral. "I was thinking about my mom," Nathan said hesitatingly. "You told me a bit about how you met her, but I never really got to hear your side of the story." David felt his chest tighten. He had spent years trying to forget the past, but now, with Nathan in the picture, he realized that he wanted to remember. "Your mother was amazing," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "We met in college in Boston. She was studying journalism, and I was drowning in finance classes. I was so caught up in my career goals that I barely noticed the world around me. But your mother made sure people noticed her. Not because she was loud, but because she had this energy about her. She could walk into a room and somehow make everyone feel like they belonged there." Nathan was silent for a moment before saying, "That sounds like her." David smiled, though there was sadness in it. She had this way of making life seem bigger than it was. She believed in things, in people. She used to tell me that success wasn't just about making money. It was about making a difference. And back then I was too young and too focused on my ambitions to really understand what she meant. "So what happened?" Nathan asked, his voice softer now. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was offered a job in New York right after graduation. It was everything I'd ever wanted. A position at a top firm, a fast track to success. Your mother wanted to stay in Boston for a while longer to finish an internship she was passionate about. We promised to make it work long distance, but I was young and selfish. I put my career ahead of everything, ahead of her." Nathan didn't say anything for a while, and David worried that he had said too much. But then Nathan spoke again. "She never really talked much about you," he admitted. "I mean, I always knew who you were, but she didn't say much about what happened. I guess I always just assumed you simply left and never looked back." David swallowed the lump in his throat. "I didn't want to leave her, Nathan. I thought I was doing the right thing at the time. I told myself I'd go back to her, that once I built my career we could pick up where we left off. But life doesn't work that way. Time moves forward. And by the time I realized how much I had lost, she was already gone." Nathan let out a deep sigh. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She's gone." David felt the weight of those words. "I regret it, Nathan." Every single day, another silence stretched between them, but it wasn't as tense as before. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people finally understand each other. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "I think I want to know more," he admitted. "Not just about her, but about you. About everything." David's heart swelled. "I'd like that," he said sincerely. Nathan hesitated, then added, "But it has to be on my terms. No pressure, no expectations." "Of course," David agreed. "Whenever you're ready." There was a small pause. And then Nathan said something that caught David completely off guard. Do you think she'd want us to get to know each other?" David's throat tightened. "I know she would," he said, his voice full of emotion. Your mother always believed in second chances. Nathan didn't say anything immediately, but when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost thoughtful. Maybe we could meet again soon just to talk. David felt a wave of hope, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. I'd like that, he said warmly. When they ended the call, David sat looking out at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him. He had spent so long running from the past, from his mistakes. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to make things right. Over the next few weeks, David and Nathan fell into a cautious routine. They would meet for coffee, sometimes for dinner, each encounter becoming a little less forced, a little more natural. Nathan was still guarded in many ways, and David was careful not to push too hard. But there was a growing comfort between them, a tentative bridge being built over the chasm of lost years. One evening, as they walked through Central Park after dinner, Nathan surprised David by asking about his work. It was the first time he had shown any real interest in David's life. So, what exactly do you do? Like, day to day? The question caught David off guard, but he welcomed it. I run an investment firm. We manage portfolios, help businesses grow, that kind of thing. Nathan gave a slight smile. So basically, you make the rich richer. David laughed, appreciating the dry humor. That's one way of putting it. Nathan took a sip from the coffee he'd been carrying. I don't really know anything about finance. Mom was more into writing, and I guess I inherited that from her. I'm studying journalism at NYU. David's eyes widened. Journalism. That's incredible. Your mother would be so proud. Nathan shifted in his stride. Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm any good at it, but I like it. You must be good if you got into NYU, David pointed out. Nathan hesitated, then admitted, I actually got a scholarship. Mom always wanted me to follow what I loved, but college wasn't cheap. I had to work for it. David felt a pang of guilt. He had more money than he could spend. Yet his own son had struggled to get through college. I had no idea, he said, his voice lower now. Of course you didn't, Nathan said, though there was no anger in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. David exhaled, realizing how much he had missed. I know I can't change the past, Nathan, but I want to be part of your future if you'll let me. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his coffee cup as if it contained the answers he was seeking. I don't know what this is, he admitted. Neither do I, David said honestly. But we can figure it out. No pressure, no expectations, just one conversation at a time. Nathan looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, David felt like he was seeing something different than walls. Okay, Nathan said finally. One conversation at a time. David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't felt in years. They talked for over an hour after that, about small things, movies they liked, books Nathan was reading, David's ridiculous work schedule. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when Nathan seemed hesitant, as if afraid of letting his guard down too much. But David didn't mind. He knew this wouldn't be simple. Relationships aren't built in a day. When they left the park, Nathan thrust his hands into his coat pockets. I should go. I have a paper due tomorrow. David nodded. Of course, but maybe we could do this again sometime. Nathan hesitated for just a second before nodding. Yeah, I think I'd like that. David's heart soared. Me too. Nathan gave him a small nod before walking away into the bustling streets of New York, and David stood there watching him go, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. David found himself thinking about Nathan constantly in the days that followed. Their conversation in the park had been better than he had expected, but he knew it was just the beginning of a long ride. He didn't want to push too hard, but he also didn't want to let too much time pass between their meetings. He had already lost 20 years of his son's life. He wasn't willing to let any more slip away. So after a few days, he sent a message to Nathan. It was simple. Hope your paper went well. Let me know if you want to grab coffee again." He didn't expect an immediate response, but to his surprise, his phone rang a few minutes later. "It went fine. Coffee sounds good. Maybe this weekend?" David felt a wave of relief and quickly typed back, "Sounds perfect. Let me know when and where." They met again at a different cafe in Manhattan, this time closer to Nathan's campus. Nathan seemed a bit more relaxed this time, though there was still a cautious attitude about him. They chatted about simple things again. David asked about Nathan's classes, and Nathan in turn asked a few more questions about David's work. It wasn't exactly a heart-to-heart father-son bonding, but it was something, and David was grateful for it. As they sat in the cafe, Nathan hesitated suddenly before asking, "Why did you and my mother break up?" It was the first time he had asked, something personal, something that went beyond the surface, and David knew he had to be honest. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We were young," he admitted. "I met her when I was just starting my career. She was amazing, smart, passionate, full of life. But I was wrapped up in work. I kept promising her that things would slow down, that I'd have more time for us, but that never happened. Eventually, she got tired of waiting." Nathan was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Did you ever try to find her?" David's throat tightened. "I tried. A few years after we broke up, I realized how much I had lost, but by then, she had already moved to another city. I didn't know she was pregnant, Nathan. If I had." He trailed off, not knowing how to finish the sentence. Nathan looked down at his coffee, processing this. "She never talked much about you," he admitted. "I mean, I knew your name, but she never made you out to be a bad guy, just someone who wasn't there." David swallowed the lump in his throat. "I regret it every day," he said softly. "I should have done more. I should have fought harder to be in her life, and if I had known about you—" He shook his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Nathan, but I want you to know that if I could change the past, I would." Nathan looked at him for a long moment and then exhaled. "I don't know what to do with all of this," he admitted. "You don't have to do anything," David said. "We take it one step at a time. No pressure." Nathan nodded slowly. "Okay." They fell silent for a while after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like progress. When they finally parted ways, David walked with Nathan a few blocks before they separated. Just as Nathan was about to leave, he hesitated and then said, "Hey, thanks for reaching out." David smiled. "Thank you for giving me a chance." As he watched Nathan disappear into the crowd, David felt something shift inside him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was moving forward instead of looking back. He had a long way to go, but at least now he wasn't walking that road alone. Over the next few months, David and Nathan fell into a comfortable routine. They met for coffee regularly, sometimes for dinner, and occasionally they'd catch a movie or a baseball game. Their conversations became deeper, more meaningful. Nathan started sharing more about his life, his struggles, his dreams. And David, in turn, opened up about his past, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. One evening, after they had watched the Yankees play, Nathan surprised David by asking if he wanted to see some of his work from his journalism class. It was the first time Nathan had voluntarily shared something personal with him, and David felt honored by the gesture. They went to a small cafe near the stadium, and Nathan pulled out his laptop, showing David an article he had written about gentrification in Brooklyn. It was thoughtful, insightful, and beautifully written. David could see Elena's influence in every line, the same passion for truth, the same empathy for people's stories. "This is incredible, Nathan," David said, truly impressed. "You have a real talent for this." Nathan looked slightly embarrassed by the praise, but there was a hint of pride in his eyes. "Thanks. My professor thought it was pretty good too." For the first time, David felt a sense of true pride that had nothing to do with business deals or financial success. This was a different kind of pride, the kind a father feels when he sees his child excel. As their relationship continued to develop, David was careful not to overstep his boundaries. He never offered financial help unless Nathan brought it up first, and he was always respectful of Nathan's independence. He knew that trust was fragile, especially given their history, and he didn't want to do anything to jeopardize the progress they had made. One day, about 6 months after their first meeting at the cemetery, Nathan called David with unexpected news. "I've been offered an internship at the New York Times," he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "It's competitive as hell, and I never thought I'd get it. But somehow I did." David felt a surge of pride. "Nathan, that's fantastic. Congratulations." "Yeah, well, I've been working on my portfolio for months. I guess it paid off." There was a pause, and then Nathan added, "I was thinking maybe we could celebrate, dinner or something." David couldn't remember the last time he had felt this happy. "Absolutely. Name the place." They met at a small Italian restaurant in the village, one of Nathan's favorites. For the first time since they had reconnected, there was no tension, no awkwardness between them. They talked and laughed like old friends, sharing stories and making plans for the future. As they were finishing their meal, Nathan looked at David with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said. "All these months we've been getting to know each other, and it's been good. But there's something I need to tell you." David felt a moment of apprehension. "What is it?" Nathan took a deep breath. "I don't blame you anymore for not being there when I was growing up. I understand now that you didn't know, and that's not your fault." David felt a weight he didn't realize he was carrying lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Nathan. That means more to me than you can know." Nathan nodded. "And I've been thinking, maybe it's time I started calling you Dad." The word hit David like a physical force. Dad. Such a simple word, but loaded with so much meaning. He had never expected to hear it, especially not from the son he had discovered just months ago. "Only if you're comfortable with it," David said, his voice thick with emotion. Nathan smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I think I am." As though they walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, David felt a sense of completion he had never experienced before. He had spent years building an empire, amassing wealth and power, but none of it compared to the feeling of having his son walk beside him, calling him Dad. For the first time in decades, David Whitman felt truly rich. A year had passed since that rainy day in Greenwood Cemetery when David first met Nathan. In that time, their relationship had transformed from cautious strangers to something resembling a real father and son. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, still times when the weight of the past hung between them. But it was real and honest, and growing stronger each day. David had never imagined his life could change so profoundly in such a short time. Before Nathan, his days were filled with business meetings and financial strategies, his evenings with empty luxury in his penthouse. Now his calendar revolved around coffee dates, dinners, and baseball games with his son. The empire he had built seemed less important somehow, merely a backdrop to what truly mattered. One evening, as they walked along the Brooklyn Bridge, a place Elena had loved, Nathan brought up something that caught David off guard. "I've been thinking about her a lot lately," Nathan said, his hands gripping the railing as he looked out over the East River. The anniversary of her death is coming up." David nodded, feeling the familiar ache whenever Elena was mentioned. "I know. I still visit her grave every year." Nathan turned to him, a complexity of emotions in his eyes. "I was wondering if maybe we could go together this time." The request surprised David. Going to Elena's grave had always been a private ritual, a moment of solitary grief and regret. But the thought of standing there with their son, the living embodiment of their love, felt right somehow. "I'd be honored," David said softly. 3 days later, they stood side by side at Elena's grave. The October sky was clear, unlike the rainy day of their first meeting. Nathan had brought lilies, white, just like the ones David always brought. They placed them together at the base of the headstone. For a long while, neither spoke. Then Nathan broke the silence. "She never told me why she left you," he said, his voice thoughtful. "I asked once when I was about 16. She just said that sometimes people have different paths, and that yours led to New York while hers took another direction." David felt his chest tighten. "Did she ever regret it? Not telling me about you?" Nathan considered this, his gaze fixed on the headstone. "I think she did, especially when she got sick. She knew she was dying, and I think she worried about leaving me alone. One night near the end, she gave me an envelope with your name and information. She said if I ever needed anything, I should find you." "But you didn't," David observed gently. Nathan shook his head. "I was angry. Not at you, really, but at the situation. At the idea that I might need someone I'd never met. I was stubborn. Probably still am." He smiled slightly. "Must run in the family," David replied with a small smile of his own. They were quiet again, the autumn breeze rustling the trees around them. Then Nathan asked the question David had been dreading. "Would you have stayed? If she had told you about me?" David felt the weight of that hypothetical history. A life unlived, a path not taken. "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I would have stayed. My biggest regret isn't just losing her, Nathan. It's all the years I missed with you. Your first steps, your first words, your first day of school. I can never get those back, and that haunts me." Nathan nodded slowly, accepting the answer. "I used to imagine what you were like. When I was a kid, I mean. Sometimes I pictured you as some deadbeat who didn't care. Other times I imagined you were a secret agent or something, unable to be with us because you were saving the world." He laughed softly at the memory. "I'm sorry the reality is so mundane," David said with gentle humor. "Just a businessman who made the worst mistake of his life." "Not the worst," Nathan corrected him. "If you hadn't gone to New York, built your career, who knows where any of us would be? Maybe things happened exactly as they needed to bring us here." The wisdom in his son's words struck David deeply. He had spent so long regretting the past that he hadn't considered how it had shaped the present. A present that, despite its late start, now included a relationship with his son. As they walked away from the cemetery, Nathan surprised David by linking his arm through his father's, a gesture so small yet so profound in its meaning. It was acceptance, forgiveness, and love, all wrapped into one simple touch. "She would have liked this," Nathan said quietly. "Us. Together." David felt tears prick at his eyes. "Yes," he agreed. "I think she would." David sat in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, reading through Nathan's latest article for the Times. His internship had turned into a part-time position, and his byline was appearing more frequently. Each time David saw his son's name in print, he felt a surge of pride that surpassed any business achievement in his career. The intercom buzzed and his assistant's voice came through. "Mr. Whitman, your 2:00 is here." "Send them in," David replied, setting aside the newspaper. The door opened to reveal Nathan. David's face broke into a smile. "This is a surprise. I thought we were meeting for dinner later." Nathan grinned, dropping his messenger bag on one of the leather chairs. "We are. I was in the building interviewing someone for a story and thought I'd stop by." He looked around the expansive corner office with its panoramic views. "So this is where the magic happens, huh?" "I wouldn't call it magic," David chuckled. "Just a lot of meetings and paperwork." Nathan wandered to the window, gazing out at the city below. David observed him quietly, still sometimes amazed by the fact that this young man, so intelligent, so compassionate, was his son. In the 18 months since they'd found each other, Nathan had graduated with honors from NYU, established himself at the Times, and moved into a slightly better apartment in Brooklyn, though he still refused any significant financial help from David. "I wanted to ask you something," Nathan said, turning away from the window. His expression was slightly nervous, which intrigued David. "Anything," David replied, leaning forward in his chair. The Times is hosting their annual gala next week. It's a big deal. All the editors, major contributors, important people from across the industry. Nathan hesitated, then continued. I was wondering if you'd like to come as my guest. The invitation caught David by surprise. This would be their first public appearance together at a significant event. It felt like a milestone, an acknowledgement of their relationship that went beyond private dinners and casual outings. Nathan, I'd be honored, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The relief on Nathan's face was evident. Great. It's black tie, but I'm guessing that's not a problem for you, he added with a smirk, gesturing to David's tailored suit. I think I can manage. David smiled. Nathan started to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and Dad, they'll be announcing the recipients of the Young Journalists Fellowship. I'm up for it. That's incredible, David exclaimed. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Nathan shrugged, a hint of his old shyness returning. I didn't want to jinx it, and he hesitated. I wanted you to be there if I get it, or if I don't. After Nathan left, David sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by emotion. The casual way Nathan had called him Dad, the fact that he wanted David present for such an important moment in his career, these were gifts David had never expected to receive. The night of the gala arrived, and David found himself unusually nervous as his car pulled up to the venue. He had attended countless formal events over the years, but none had held this significance. Tonight wasn't about business connections or investment opportunities. It was about supporting his son. He spotted Nathan immediately, standing near the entrance in a rented tuxedo that was slightly too big for his lean frame. Despite the ill-fitting attire, he carried himself with a confidence that reminded David strikingly of Elena. You made it, Nathan said with a smile, adjusting his bow tie nervously. Wouldn't miss it, David replied, resisting the urge to fix the crooked tie himself. How are you feeling? Terrified, Nathan admitted. All the senior editors are here, plus half the Pulitzer committee. David placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. They're lucky to have you, and so am I. The evening progressed with speeches and awards, culminating in the announcement of the fellowship recipients. David watched Nathan's face as they read the names, saw the flicker of hope, then disappointment, then a composed smile as someone else was called to the stage. Next time, David whispered, squeezing his son's arm. After the ceremony, as they stood by the bar, Nathan introduced David to his colleagues and mentors. This is my father, David Whitman, he said repeatedly, with a natural ease that belied their complicated history. Later, as they walked through the cool night air toward David's car, Nathan spoke quietly. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for inviting me, David replied. You know, when I was growing up, I used to imagine moments like this, having a dad to bring to important events, someone who'd be proud of me no matter what. Nathan confessed. Even though I didn't get the fellowship, having you there, it felt right. David stopped walking, turning to face his son. Nathan, I have achieved more than I ever dreamed possible in business. I've built skyscrapers, closed billion-dollar deals, been on the cover of Fortune magazine. But nothing has made me prouder than watching you tonight, doing what you love, being the man you've become. Under the glow of the street lamps, father and son embraced, the years of separation dissolving in the warmth of their newfound bond. 2 years had passed since that fateful day in the cemetery. 2 years of building bridges, healing wounds, and creating a relationship that neither David nor Nathan had ever thought possible. What had begun as weekly coffee meetings had evolved into a genuine father-son bond. Still imperfect, still learning, but undeniably real. David had just turned 62, and for the first time in his life, he found himself thinking seriously about the future, not just his own, but the future of everything he had built over the decades. His company, Whitman Investments, had grown into one of the most respected financial institutions in New York. With billions in assets under management and a reputation for integrity in an industry often lacking it. For years, he had assumed he would eventually sell the company or hand it over to his executive team, He had never considered the possibility of a legacy, someone who might carry on his work with the same vision and values. But now, watching Nathan thrive in his journalism career, David wondered if there might be another path forward. It was a Sunday afternoon when he invited Nathan to his penthouse for lunch. They sat on the terrace enjoying the spring sunshine and the spectacular view of Central Park below. "I've been thinking about something," David said, setting down his glass of water. "And I wanted to get your thoughts." Nathan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Sounds serious." "It is, in a way." David paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been considering the future of my company. I won't be running it forever, and lately I've been wondering what happens next." "You're not sick, are you?" Nathan asked, sudden concern crossing his face. David laughed. "No, nothing like that. Just planning ahead. Good business practice." Relief washed over Nathan's features. "So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about creating a foundation," David said. "Using a significant portion of my wealth to support causes that matter. Education for underprivileged youth, arts programs, journalism scholarships." Nathan nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. "Like the opportunities Mom never had." "Exactly," David said softly. "Elena had such talent, such passion. I've often wondered how different her life might have been with the right support." They were quiet for a moment, both thinking of Elena and the what-ifs that would never be answered. "I'd like you to be involved," David continued. "Not to run it, I know you're committed to your career at the Times, but to help shape its mission, perhaps serve on the board." Nathan looked genuinely surprised. "Me? I don't know anything about running a foundation. You know, about integrity, about recognizing talent and potential, about the struggles people face when trying to pursue their dreams without resources." David leaned forward. "Those things can't be taught in business school." Nathan was silent, for a long moment processing the offer. "What would you call it?" David smiled. "I was thinking the Elena Whitman Foundation." Nathan's eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. She would have loved that. "So you'll consider it?" David asked. "I'll do more than consider it," Nathan replied. "I'm in." Later that afternoon, as they walked through Central Park, something that had become a ritual for them, Nathan asked a question that took David by surprise. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you and Mom had stayed together? If you had known about me from the beginning?" David had asked himself that question countless times since discovering Nathan's existence. "All the time," he admitted. "I imagine a very different life, one where I watched you grow up, where I was there for your first day of school, your baseball games, your graduation. Do you think you would have been happy? Given up your empire building to be a family man?" David considered this carefully. "I think I would have been happy, yes. Different, but happy. The irony is that I spent decades chasing success, thinking it would fulfill me, only to discover that what I really wanted was exactly what I'd left behind." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange, isn't it, how life works out?" "Indeed," David agreed. "But I'm grateful for where we are now, even if we took the longest possible route to get here." 6 months after their conversation about the foundation, David and Nathan stood side by side at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Before them sat New York's elite, business leaders, philanthropists, journalists, and artists, all gathered for the official launch of the Elena Whitman Foundation. "My mother believed that talent should never be constrained by circumstance," Nathan was saying, his voice strong and clear. "She taught me that stories matter, that art matters, that giving voice to truth matters. This foundation will honor her legacy by ensuring that promising young writers, artists, and journalists have the support they need to pursue their dreams." David watched his son speak with a mixture of pride and amazement. Nathan had transformed from the angry young man at the cemetery into a confident, compassionate adult who carried Elena's spirit in every word he spoke. The foundation had become a joint passion for them, a way to channel their shared love for Elena into something meaningful. After the speeches, as guests mingled and pledged support, Alex Gardner, the editor-in-chief of the Times, approached them with a glass of champagne in hand. "Impressive launch," Alex said, shaking David's hand before turning to Nathan. "And impressive speech, Whitman. You've got your mother's way with words." Nathan smiled. "Thank you, sir." "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you," Alex continued. "There's an opening in our London bureau, foreign correspondent position. Given your work over the past 2 years, I think you'd be perfect for it." David felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride at Nathan's success, but also a hollow feeling at the thought of him moving across the ocean, just as their relationship had truly solidified. "London?" Nathan repeated, clearly caught off guard. "Think about it," Alex said. "It's a big step up. Career-making opportunity. Let me know by the end of the week." With a nod to both of them, he moved on to other guests. Later that night, after the event had concluded, David and Nathan sat in the quiet of David's penthouse, ties loosened, both processing the evening's success and the unexpected job offer. "London," David said finally, breaking the silence. "That's quite an opportunity." Nathan nodded, swirling the scotch in his glass. "It is. I never expected it." "When would you need to leave?" "A month, probably, if I take it." Nathan looked up at his father. "I'm not sure I should." David raised an eyebrow. "Because of the foundation?" "Because of everything," Nathan admitted. "The foundation, the Times, you. I finally found my footing here, built a life that makes sense." David felt a surge of affection for his son, along with a determination not to repeat the mistakes of the past. He had once chosen career over love, and it had cost him 20 years with his son. He wouldn't let Nathan make a similar sacrifice. "Nathan," he said gently, "when your mother and I were young, I chose ambition over our relationship. I told myself I could have both, the career I wanted and the life with her. But I couldn't split myself that way, and in trying to, I lost what mattered most." Nathan listened intently as David continued. "This foundation, our relationship, they mean the world to me. But I would never want to hold you back from following your own path. The foundation will be here. I will be here. London is an opportunity you've earned through your talent and hard work." "But what if I go and everything changes?" Nathan asked, voicing his fear. "What if we lose what we've built?" David smiled, understanding the concern all too well. "Life has changed, son. The question isn't whether things will change, but whether we're strong enough to change with them." Nathan considered this, then asked with a hint of vulnerability, "You really think I should go?" "I think you should follow your heart," David replied. "But know that whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. And that will never change, no matter how many oceans are between us." Nathan nodded slowly, a decision forming in his eyes. "I need to talk to Martha about it," he said, referring to his girlfriend of the past year. "She's applying for residency programs. This could complicate things. Love often does," David said with a knowing smile. "But the complications are usually worth it." 3 days after the foundation launch, Nathan called David and asked to meet at their favorite cafe in Brooklyn. David arrived early, sensing the importance of the conversation to come. When Nathan walked in, David could tell immediately that he had made his decision. "I'm going to London," Nathan said without preamble, as he sat down across from his father. "I talked it over with Martha, and she's actually been offered a research position at King's College Hospital. It seems like the universe is pointing us in the same direction." David nodded, feeling a complex mixture of pride and sadness. "I think you're making the right choice. It won't be forever," Nathan added quickly. 2 years, maybe 3. A chance to broaden my perspective, cover international stories. "And I'll visit," David promised. "Regularly. I have business interests in Europe that I've been neglecting anyway." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters: Nathan's apartment, his role with the foundation, how they would maintain their relationship across an ocean. But underneath the logistics ran a current of emotion that neither man fully expressed. As they walked out onto the street afterward, Nathan paused. "I never thought I'd be sad about putting an ocean between us," he admitted with a small laugh. Considering 3 years ago I didn't even know you existed. David smiled, touched by the honesty. Life has a way of surprising us. I'm going to miss our Sunday walks, Nathan said, and those terrible Yankees games you drag me to. They're not terrible, David protested, just inconsistent. They both laughed, the momentary levity masking the deeper feelings beneath. Want you to use my apartment while I'm gone, Nathan said suddenly. The foundation office is closer to Brooklyn than your penthouse, and honestly, I'd feel better knowing someone was checking on the place. David raised an eyebrow. You want me to stay in your walk-up with the temperamental hot water and the neighbor who practices saxophone at midnight? Nathan grinned. Yes. Consider it cultural immersion. I'll think about it, David replied, though they both knew he would do it, if only to maintain this connection to his son while he was away. The weeks leading up to Nathan's departure flew by. There were visa applications, apartment sublets, and 1,000 other details to manage. David threw himself into helping, partly to be useful and partly to avoid thinking about the impending separation. One evening, as they were packing books, in Nathan's apartment, Nathan paused, holding a worn paperback in his hands. This was Mom's, he said softly. Her favorite book. She used to read passages to me when I was a kid. David took the offered book, a collection of poems by Pablo Neruda. The pages were dog-eared, the margins filled with Elena's delicate handwriting. She always believed that the most important stories are the ones we carry inside us, Nathan continued. That's why she loved Neruda. He wrote about love and loss and hope in a way that felt like he was speaking directly to your soul. David ran, his fingers over Elena's annotations, feeling a connection to her that transcended time and loss. She was wiser than both of us, he said quietly. I want you to have this, Nathan said, pushing the book toward David. While I'm gone. A piece of both of us to keep with you. David felt his throat tighten with emotion. Nathan, I couldn't. Please, Nathan insisted. It would mean a lot to know you had it. David accepted the book, understanding the magnitude of the gesture. This wasn't just a book. It was a sacred piece of the life Nathan had shared with Elena, a life David had never been part of. Until now. The night before Nathan's flight, David hosted a small farewell dinner at his penthouse. Martha was there, along with a few of Nathan's closest friends and colleagues. It was a warm, intimate gathering, filled with stories and laughter, and promises to stay connected. When the others had left, Nathan lingered, standing at the window overlooking the city that had shaped both their lives in such different ways. Thank you, he said simply. For what? David asked. For finding me. For not giving up when I was a complete jerk. For becoming the father I never knew I needed. 6 months after Nathan's departure, David found himself in London for the 3rd time. Each visit had been ostensibly for business, meetings with European investors, discussions about expanding Whitman investments internationally. But everyone, including his executive team, knew the real reason behind his frequent trips across the Atlantic. He stepped out of the black cab onto the rain-slicked streets of Notting Hill, where Nathan and Martha had found a small but charming flat. The neighborhood suited them, vibrant, artistic, filled with bookshops and cafes that reminded Nathan of Brooklyn. Nathan opened the door before David could knock, greeting him with a warm embrace. Right on time, he said, taking David's coat. Martha's just finishing up at the hospital. She'll meet us at the restaurant. David followed his son into the cozy apartment, noting the changes since his last visit 2 months ago. New books stacked on the coffee table, framed photos. On the wall, a collection of vintage typewriters that Nathan had started collecting from London's flea markets. Tea? Nathan offered, moving to the small kitchen area. Please, David replied, settling onto the sofa. How's the latest story coming along? Nathan had been working on an investigative piece about refugee resettlement across Europe, a story that had taken him to refugee camps in Greece, government offices in Brussels, and community centers throughout the UK. Finally coming together, Nathan said, handing David a steaming mug. It's the most challenging thing I've ever written, but also the most important. David nodded, feeling that familiar pride swell in his chest. And the foundation? Any concerns about the new scholarship program? They spent the next hour catching up on both their work, the foundation, which Nathan still helped direct remotely, David's plans for a new sustainable investment fund, the successes and challenges of their respective careers. It felt comfortable, this rhythm they had established despite the distance between them. Later, as they walked to meet Martha at a local restaurant, Nathan brought up something unexpected. "I've been thinking about Elena a lot lately," he said, his breath visible in the cool evening air. "Being in a new place, starting a new chapter, it makes me wonder what she would think of all this. Of us." David considered this carefully. "I think she'd be proud of you, of the man you've become, the work you're doing. And of us? Of this relationship we've built?" David's pace slowed as he pondered the question. "I'd like to think she would be happy about it, that despite everything, we found our way to each other." Nathan nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. After a few moments of silence, he spoke again. "I found some of her old journals while I was packing for London. I've been reading them bit by bit." David felt his heart quicken. "What do they say?" "Lots of things. Thoughts about her art, observations about life." Nathan paused. "And some entries about you." David almost stopped walking. "About me?" "She wrote about how you met, your time together, how much she loved you." Nathan glanced at his father. "And later, after she left, how much she struggled with her decision to keep me from you." David felt a tightness in his chest. "She did?" Nathan nodded. "She wrote that she was afraid that a baby would derail your ambitions, that you'd resent her for complicating your carefully planned future. And later, when I was older, she worried that suddenly appearing with a child would disrupt the life you'd built." "She was wrong," David said softly. "Was she?" Nathan asked, not accusingly but genuinely curious. "The man you were then, would you have truly welcomed that disruption?" It was a question David had asked himself countless times over the past few years. Would his younger self, so driven and ambitious, have embraced fatherhood? Would he have seen Elena and their child as an anchor rather than a blessing? "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I'd like to think I would have risen to the occasion, but I was different then. Harder, more selfish." "That's what she was afraid of," Nathan said. "But she also wrote that she never stopped loving you. That every time she looked at me, she saw pieces of you, in my determination, my focus." David felt a surge of emotion, gratitude for these glimpses into Elena's thoughts, regret for the years lost, and a profound appreciation for the son walking beside him, sharing these intimate pieces of his mother's heart. As Nathan's 2-year assignment in London approached its end, life took another unexpected turn. During one of their weekly video calls, Nathan shared news that left David momentarily speechless. "Martha and I are getting married," Nathan announced, his face breaking into a smile that radiated through the screen. "I asked her last weekend. On a trip to the countryside, she said yes." David's face lit up with genuine joy. "Nathan, that's wonderful news. Congratulations." "There's more," Nathan continued, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "We're thinking of coming back to New York after the wedding. Martha's been offered a position at Columbia Presbyterian, and the Times wants me back for a senior editorial role." David tried to contain his excitement. "That sounds like perfect timing, and the foundation could certainly use your hands-on involvement again." "Actually, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about," Nathan said. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, Martha, our careers, eventually starting a family of our own." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I imagined where I wanted to raise children, I kept coming back to New York. Not just because of our jobs, but because of you, Dad. I want our kids to know their grandfather, to have what I didn't have growing up." David felt a wave of emotion wash over him. The thought of being a grandfather, of having the chance to be present from the beginning of a child's life in a way he hadn't been for Nathan, was overwhelming. "I'd like that," he said simply, his voice thick with feeling. 2 months later, David found himself back in London, this time for the small, intimate wedding ceremony. As he watched Nathan and Martha exchange vows in a centuries-old stone chapel, he couldn't help but think of Elena. She should have been here to see this moment, to see the remarkable man their son had become, to share in the joy of this new chapter. At the reception, while the small gathering of friends and family celebrated, David stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The evening air was cool, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "She would have loved this," came Nathan's voice from behind him. David turned to see his son, handsome in his wedding suit, a glass of champagne in his hand. "Yes, she would have," he agreed. "I used to imagine her at my wedding," Nathan admitted, coming to stand beside his father. "When I was younger, I dreamed up all these scenarios where she'd miraculously recovered, where she was there to see all the important moments." "I wish she could have been," David said softly. "In a way she is," Nathan replied. "Everything good in me came from her, her compassion, her creativity, her belief in the power of stories. And from you," he added, looking at David. "Her journals helped me understand something important. She didn't keep us apart out of spite or anger. She made what she thought was the right choice at the time based on who you both were then." David nodded, having come to the same understanding. "We were young, making decisions that felt right in the moment without seeing the full picture. But here's the thing," Nathan continued. "If she hadn't made those choices, if our lives had taken different paths, we might not be standing here now. I wouldn't be the person I am, and neither would you." David considered this wisdom from his son, marveling at the perspective that seemed beyond his years. "Life rarely follows the path we expect," he agreed. "But sometimes it leads us exactly where we need to be, even if we take the longest possible route to get there." Nathan smiled, raising his glass in a toast. "To the long route," he said. David clinked his glass against his son's. "And to wherever it leads us next." As they stood there under the stars, father and son bound by blood, choice, and forgiveness, David felt a sense of completion he had never expected to find. Their story hadn't begun the way either of them would have chosen, but it had led them here, to understanding, to acceptance, and to love. 5 years had passed since that rainy day in Greenwood Cemetery, when a chance encounter changed two lives forever. Today, under a clear autumn sky, David and Nathan stood once again before Elena's headstone, but they weren't alone this time. "This is where I met your grandfather," Nathan explained to the small girl whose hand he held. 4-year-old Elena Whitman Jr., named after the grandmother she would never meet, looked up with curious eyes that mirrored her father's. "Right here?" she asked, her voice high and clear in the cemetery's hushed atmosphere. "Right here," David confirmed, smiling at his granddaughter. "It was raining and I was very sad. But then I met your daddy, and everything changed." Little Elena considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Were you mad at each other?" Nathan and David exchanged a look that contained all the history between them, the anger, the confusion, the slow build of trust, and finally, the deep bond that now seemed unbreakable. "A little bit," Nathan admitted. "But then we talked, and we listened, and we learned to be a family." David knelt beside his granddaughter, helping her place a bouquet of white lilies on the grave. "Your grandmother would have adored you," he said softly. "You have her spirit, her curiosity, her beautiful heart." The little girl beamed at the compliment, then turned her attention to the headstone, tracing the letters of her own name engraved in the marble. After a moment of quiet reflection, they walked together through the cemetery toward the waiting car. David's pace was slower now, his hair fully silver, but his eyes still held the same intensity they always had, particularly when they rested on his son and granddaughter. The foundation approved the new journalism scholarship program, Nathan mentioned as they walked. 10 full rides for underprivileged students interested in investigative reporting. "Your mother would be proud," David said. "Of that and of you, award-winning journalist, dedicated father, foundation director." Nathan smiled, watching his daughter skip ahead on the path. "I've been thinking about writing a book," he said. "About us. About Mom. About finding family. In unexpected places." David felt his heart swell. "I think that's a wonderful idea." "It's our story, but it's also universal," Nathan continued. "About forgiveness, second chances, the complications of love." They reached the cemetery gates, where Martha waited with their infant son, David Jr., sleeping peacefully in his carrier. As they gathered together, this family forged by both blood and choice, David felt a sense of wonder at the fullness of his life. What had begun with loss had transformed into something beautiful, something lasting. Though Elena was gone, her spirit lived on in their son, in their grandchildren, and in the love that had finally found its way home. As they drove away from Greenwood Cemetery, David looked back one last time at the place where it all began, feeling not grief but gratitude, for second chances, for healing, and for the unexpected gift of family that had come to him when he least expected it, but when he needed it most.